The first book I ever wrote and published was about 100 pages long, and I was floating on air. I felt so proud of myself that I had gotten those 100 pages out. And if you asked me at the beginning of that project, one, whether I could write that many words and that many pages, and two, whether I really had that much to say, I would have said no and no. But as it turns out, when we're writing about things that are in our expertise, whether that's our story or our message or our advice for living a better life, you're going to be able to fill as many pages as you want. So the question of how long should my book be is actually not at all about how long you're going to fill. It's rather, what does your reader need? So let's talk through the 5 main things that you need to think about to make sure your book is the right size for your message, your book, and your reader. If you're ready to get your story out in the world, but you've just been waiting as you're not sure whether the budget's gonna fit or the timeline or the support, I get it. Every author is different, every book is different. And that is why in December, we are rolling out 3 different tiers of service. You are not gonna wanna miss this announcement when we open to the general public. And if you wanna be the first to hear, head to the link in the show notes, take the book strategy quiz. Once you do that, you're gonna get a ton of helpful information now, and you're gonna be the first to hear when we make these new tiers of service available. I can't wait, and I can't wait to hear about your book. So when I was a professor, I always gave very clear, detailed instructions on how long the writing assignments my students did should be. And the reason for that was that when I was a student, I hated it when my teachers would say, oh, however long it needs to be to get your point across. Any point you want to make can either be a paragraph or a book. It just depends on a number of factors, including your message, your readers, and you. And I want to talk through those factors today because I think you're going to find that it's not as intimidating as you think to build out a full book that needs to be a book. I promise you are not going to get 5 pages in and realize you have nothing to say, because we're going to talk about how do you figure out how much detail is exactly the right amount. So if you've been watching this channel long, you know that the first thing I'm going to ask you to think about is your reader. You should always have this sense of your audience in mind before you ever start writing. Now it's going to come into clearer focus as you're building out that memoir or leadership book. But the more you know about them from the outset, the more you're going to be able to make strong, reasonable, logical, educated decisions that don't rely on that inner critic telling you you're not good enough, you don't have enough to say, no one wants to hear your opinions. First of all, that person can buzz off. That is not you in your head telling you all those things. But second of all, let's think about how do book industry professionals approach this? Okay, so every single week, I release this video and I release a accompanying blog post. Whenever this goes out to our newsletter subscribers, about 2/3 of y'all click through to the video and about 1/3 click over to the blog post. Why is that? Because those are different types of consumers, right? People who are wanting to read the blog post version, either they're wanting to digest that information a little bit more or they want to move pretty quickly through it, right? They want to scan it, see if there's anything they can take away. Folks who want to watch the video tend to be a little bit more relational. Hello. You want to hear someone tell you the story, maybe you want to take a walk or something while you're listening to it. There are different types of needs that your reader is going to have. And for books, this goes triple, because we're not talking about a 20-minute investment to watch a video. We are talking about hours of their life and money to put down to pay for that book. So what you need to think about is, does your reader want a book? Do they want an audio book? Do they want just a blog post? Do they want a series of podcasts? What is it that they're looking for? What you find may be that they want all kinds of things, and the only way you're going to know is to ask. So an easy tip for this, I hear a lot of people say to me, everybody tells me I should write a book. Then you can write a book. That means that people are really actively engaged in what your story is, and they want all of the detail that you can give them in a book that really isn't practical in a face-to-face conversation, right? That would be, a 20-hour long conversation. Nobody wants that, right? But in a book, they want to get all that detail. If you are a leader or a business leader, this might come in a little bit different form, but it's usually going to come in the form of curiosity. So people are going to come to you and they're going to have a lot of questions, and they won't be just the simple questions, right? Like, where do I go to file my taxes? Do you have a great recommendation for an email server? That is not what they're going to ask. They're going to want to know the why behind what you're saying. If people are asking you, oh, why do you have your business set up like that? Or, oh, how do you think through this issue that I have in my day-to-day life? They want more detail. They want stories. They want experiences. They want anecdotes. They want metaphors. They want the information that lets them sit in what you're trying to say and really process it. So, if you are getting that kind of question, or when you talk about your story or share your ideas, people want to hear more, that is a great sign that your reader is interested in a book. If, on the other hand, what you tend to get are kind of quick questions, things that you can, email and answer real quick, that might be a case where you want to think about doing a podcast or a blog, or even thinking about things like carousels on social media or other kinds of ways you can get those simpler, more straightforward answers out. But I'll bet if you've got some stories, if you have lived through some stuff, social media post is not going to cut it. And if that's the case, you should go for a book. Now, how long do we think that books should be in the industry? This varies, but what I try to aim for is about 200 pages for a standard memoir. If you know that your reader is going to want a much quicker read, you can go with about 100 pages. We have had memoirs and leadership books in particular do really, really well at 100 pages, which is about 30,000 words, because those readers can just bop right through that. You can knock that audiobook out. It won't be super long. People can take a few walks and get through it. That is a great length. That is in contrast to something like a novel. So novels are usually over 100,000 words, and fantasy is on the way longer end. You might have thrillers on a little bit of the shorter side. But when we're talking about nonfiction, a lot of times people want something just a little bit tighter. There have been successful longer memoirs, but 200 pages, great to aim for if you know your audience is going to be a little more rushed or they're not used to reading books. 100 pages is also a really great goal to quickly move through the story while giving them the details that they need. Okay, so the second thing I want you to consider is, how much does your audience already know? Now, this is a tricky one because a lot of times when we're thinking about what our audience knows, we assume that we are our audience. And we already know all this stuff, right? Okay, so I wish that I could give you just a tip that you could do in your closed office, on your laptop, on your Saturday writing time. Unfortunately, the only way to figure out what your reader already knows is to ask. So you can find someone who is your ideal reader. That's a great person to run your ideas by. See what they're interested in. See, more importantly, what they already know and understand. And ask them what they're interested in learning more about. So I want to give you an example here of a brilliant CEO, a brilliant executive that I have worked with for a while, who has been working on a book. And one thing that she mentioned to me was that she had done a talk, and she has a way of looking at running your business that is incredibly values-based. We follow it in our company, where you lay out what your values are, your 3 to 5 core values, and then you use those values to make every single decision in your business. It's simple. It is brilliant. The way that she presents it really is mind-blowing. It makes you think back to all of the decisions you've made in your life or your business and think, wow, where was I working out of my values? And where was I working out of something like fear or FOMO or all of these things that can get in our way of running the business or living the life that we really want to have? Now, when she and I talked very, very early in the process of her starting writing her book, she said to me, I gave this talk and people were just shocked by this. They really had to stop. She said, I saw people stop taking notes and just process. And of course, when that happens, when you're giving a talk, you always think, oh my gosh, I've lost them. That wasn't the case at all. In fact, they all came up to her afterwards and said, this is game changing. Okay, so it is really easy to think that a simple concept like that doesn't need to be explained, right? I'll write a blog post, I'll share this idea, name your values, and then make your decisions according to them. But it did such a disservice for her to use such a minimal amount of words. That is an excellent sign that you need at least a 100-page book. And you may even want to go longer depending on the experiences and anecdotes and essentially evidence that you're going to share. So really think about, what does the audience know and what does my curse of expertise tell me that, everybody already knows it? We want to make sure that we are entering into this consideration not out of our gut, not out of this space of fear, but rather out of evidence. What does your reader want? That's what we're going to give them. They're going to love your book because you have catered it exactly to what they need. Okay, so after you have thought about what does your audience need to know and what do they already know, the next thing I want you to think about, and this is very particular for any of the storytelling components, the next thing I want you to think about is, where do you need to slow down and where do you need to speed up? So the simple rule of thumb is, anytime you are moving through a scene that needs to be very action-packed, you want the reader to feel rushed along with you, that adrenaline surge, or something very, very exciting is happening. We want to move pretty quickly through that point. So short sentences are the norm. We want short paragraphs. If we have dialogue, we want to keep the dialogue real short, skip the tags, so the he said or she said, skip those so that you can move very, very quickly through the action. That's going to give your reader that sense of propelling forward in the story. It's that thing that makes the climax of a book so delicious. Those points, the points where something exciting is happening, we want to tighten up our word count. We want to keep those as short as we can get them. On the other end of the spectrum, we need to make sure that our audience has all of the background information that they need to understand what's happening in your stories, your memoir, your larger story, or your message. So the places that we want to slow down, we don't want to do this at the very beginning of a memoir. We want to make sure we grab our reader's attention first. But around chapter 3 or 4, you can start to give a little bit more background. You can start to build out who you are. Now, I know I've talked about our amazing political memoirist, this book I cannot wait to share with you. She ran for political office and she wanted to write a book that would really highlight the way that the power structures she came up against were harmful to democracy. It's an amazing book by Wendy Davis. She ran for Utah State Senate, and it is going to blow your mind. But one thing that we had to think through in her book is, since she was talking through all of these power structures, things like gender oppression, things like fat phobia and how people look at particular bodies as being one way or another, when she's thinking through all these things, a lot of those things come from childhood, right? They're memories that we have carried with us that inform the way we think about our life today. Well, we knew that we weren't going to start that book when she was born. That is not the type of book. It is a very specific book. It is a true memoir, a very specific book that covers just one slice of her life. At the same time, we needed that background stuff. So what we did was we started at the beginning of the political story. We started when she was gearing up for her political run. But then as we came to places where something in her present life triggered something from her childhood, we used those as the jumping off point for flashbacks. I know you've heard, and I support this too, that you should not overuse flashbacks in your writing. That's true. But memoir is a genre where it calls for giving a little bit more background. There are points where your reader wants to slow down and really process what you're talking about. This can happen at, major turning points in your story. That's a great point to drop that truth bomb or drop that knowledge bomb that you learned. And then back off, give a little background, let your reader have some time to process. Or you can also use these at points where you want to really emphasize your message. So in her case, she's talking about how these power structures are built over years and years and years and years. So she's going to think about, for example, this incident that she witnessed in her middle school cafeteria that really changed the way she thought about abuses of power. That's an important point of this book. So she wants to stop. She wants to give her reader time to catch up, time to really process and really get to know that that is an important piece of her story. So when do you need to slow down? Give that background, give that backstory, give a little bit more explanation. And when do you need to speed up? Get the reader moving, get them excited, get that adrenaline going as they're reading your story at the climax or other really exciting action-packed scenes. Where do you need to slow down? Where do you need to speed up? This is going to help you feel a little bit more comfortable with the length of your memoir so that you don't feel like, oh my gosh, I am boring my reader to death. It's too long. Nope. Be confident where your reader needs more time and where they need you to hurry up. Okay, so the third thing I want to talk about is which aspects of your story do people tend to respond to? All of us we tell stories all the time. We're storytelling beings, Kenneth Burke said. And that is 100% true. All of us do all of our communication through stories, whether we're consciously thinking about it or not. That is the way you get your message across. But there always are going to be stories that really land, and stories that as you're telling them, you feel kind of silly. Have you ever had that feeling where you're kind of telling a story and you can see the other person getting bored and you've got to wrap it up because you don't just want to stop in the middle, but you know that you have lost your audience? Okay, thinking through how these different stories of our lives have landed is a great way to get confident about which stories you want to include. This is going to play a huge role in how long your book is, right? Because if you are making a point and then giving 3 stories to drive that point home, your book's going to be a little bit longer than if you feel like, you just want to make the point, give a quick little example, and move on. So I want to talk here about a coaching client that I have that I'm working with him on his book proposal. So what he's working on is a career advice book. He helps people start up their new businesses, and he is wanting to share a lot of the pitfalls that people fall into when they first get ready to start to launch a new product. So this is such an exciting book to me because what he's got is about 30 chapters, each that highlights a particular type of person he's worked with over the years. So when he was brainstorming, how many chapters do I need? How long does this need to be? What he did was he sat down and he made a list of all the common issues he saw people having. These were all things that he had talked through with his current clients. He knew which ones were really salient. He knew which ones a reader would say, oh my gosh, that's me. So those are the ones he picked. Then when we laid out, he's going to have 30 chapters, we knew that he wanted pretty short, bite-sized chapters. This is what we talked about in the very first point, right? What's your reader going to do with this book? He wanted people to be able to pick the book up, flip to a chapter, scan through it, 20 minutes, have a takeaway that they could apply right then. So we knew then that those chapters should be on the shorter side, maybe 1,500 words to 2,000 words. That's going to be about 5 to 7 pages per chapter. Then right? It's just math. Once you know that you need 30 chapters, once you know how long each chapter is going to be on average, you've just got to multiply. You'll know exactly how long your book needs to be. And the great thing about a structure like that is that if you find, once you start finishing the draft, once you start asking for feedback on it, if you find that people feel like it's too long, It's pretty easy to cut it, right? You can just ask them which stories are the most important, which stories grabbed you, and which stories seemed like they maybe didn't belong. Cut those, keep the ones people loved. You will have a perfect sized book every single time. All right, and our last tip. How can you break your idea down into bite-sized pieces? Now, this is the piece of advice that takes all of the previous into account because you're gonna need to think about your book holistically. So when we're talking about bite-sized pieces, what I mean is, do you know the individual building blocks that make your story or your message make sense? One of the tips that I very often give to people when they want to start writing their memoir is to make a brain dump document of everything you want to say. Every story, every message, every idea, every person. Don't filter. Get out a piece of paper and by hand write every single thing you want to say. Here's what I find. Some people will come back with a list of hundreds of items. And some people will come back with a list of 4 or 5. Usually the people that have that list of 4 or 5, it strikes fear deep in their heart. They thought they had a book, but now when they look at these 5 measly little things, they're really not sure that they've got enough to fill anything that would be called a book. Well, here is what I always tell them to do. Take that list of 5 things. Take the first item on that list, and now make a brain dump list of everything that goes into that item. Because I guarantee if you come away with 5 or 10, even 15 points, I bet within those points, you have a more than 1 point per point. So what that is to say, for example, let's say you make a list of all the things you want in your memoir. And maybe you've got something on there that's like, oldest daughter born. Well, oldest daughter born is not 1 point, right? When you have that first baby, that is such an exciting, scary, nerve-wracking time in your life. You are going through so much at that time. So that's a great example of a point where stopping, slowing down, and thinking about the smaller details, the smaller steps you had to go through. So when you're thinking of having your first child, you're going to be thinking about what was your prenatal care? How did you find out that you were pregnant in the first place? Were there any hurdles that you had to face with your doctor's visits? Were there struggles that you had during the pregnancy? How did your husband react? How did your parents react? How did all of these things happen? Because those are all individual points that actually fit into one of those 5 or 10 that you wrote down on the first go. So if you do that exercise, if you write down every point you want in your book, and what you find is there aren't enough, go back to that list. Because I promise you, you're going to find more important things in that list that you forgot because you were thinking a little bit too high level. When we make our list, we want to be at the ground floor. We want to think about all of the details. Later we can go through, we can choose, what does our audience care about the most? How are they reading? What kinds of things do they want to hear? And where do you need to speed up and slow down? All of those other tips I already gave are going to pack into your list of topics to make sure your book is exactly the right sized. But first, you've got to make the list. Okay, if you are finding that it is just too much to try to do this on your own, that it would be really, really helpful to have somebody prompt you with questions, ask you to explain more, say, oh, that's interesting, or oh, let's skip this part. You might need a ghostwriter or a book coach. And if that's the case, I have such an exciting announcement. Stay tuned for the tag at the end of the episode so you can learn about all of the exciting things Page and Podium has to offer. I am on a mission to make sure that everyone has access to the support and tools that they need to tell their story and tell their story well. And that is why I am so excited to roll out 2 brand new offers that are going to fit so much more comfortably into a whole range of budgets. Now, the first one I can't share with you quite yet, but if you are looking for a community of support and skills and tips and all of the things you need to move your memoir forward, keep an eye on this channel. But the one I want to tell you about today is the Changemaker package. This is a brand new package we're offering that is going to give you all of that ghostwriting, all of that editing support that you want, all of the help to get your story on the page, even if you're just not a writer. So that package is only available to our newsletter subscribers right now, but if you want to be the first to hear when we open it to the general public, I hope you'll head over to the link in our show notes and take the book strategy quiz today. That's going to help make sure that you get all of the information you need about what the path your book should be on and how to sign up to have us help you get it out into the world. I know that you are ready for this and you deserve to have your story out there. So sign up for that quiz right now. The link is in the show notes and I can't wait to hear about your story.